That makes me think of the selfie culture part of who we are, plays into the messaging. I'm thinking of a trip I took to Miami a few months ago when it was still a little cooler than it is right now when we're recording this. It's blistering summer, but when it was cooler, I was with some friends there, and we were on a tour boat in the harbor there briefly, and there was a woman there who obviously had spent a great deal of time and money on her appearance, and she spent the whole boat trip taking selfies of herself. She didn't have an eating disorder, at least it didn't look that way. She wasn't unhealthfully underweight or overweight, but the obvious focus on her appearance, it was like there was nothing else that mattered to her. It makes me think of the people who are so that is such a huge part of their brain that they aren't thriving as God intended us to. Are you beautiful? What is beauty to you? I'm Dr. Carol. Thanks for being part of this program. The beauty concept has been hijacked by huge elements of our culture. The money, the angst, the pain, the disorders that come out of chasing beauty. My guest on our program today is out to challenge that, change it. Melissa Johnson is a marriage and family therapist, certified spiritual director, teaches at Bethel University at St. Paul, Minnesota, and she is on a mission to expand and renew beauty. She believes that the American brand of beauty is way too small and completely misses the boat about who we are, how we thrive, and what God intended us to be and experience. This is something I run up against regularly when I talk with people who are struggling with stuff. More often women, it can affect men too. But people who struggle with seeing themselves as beautiful or not, and just that whole angst. Melissa is a great one to challenge us. She has walked the journey of having to redefine beauty for herself, and now is engaged in helping other people do exactly the same. Without waiting longer, Melissa Johnson. Melissa Johnson, what a delight to have you on the program today. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it is so such an honor to be here. So thank you for having me, Dr. Carol.
I appreciated being on your podcast a little while back. We'll make sure to link to that in the show notes and under this video. You were such a gracious host, and now I'm honored to have you here. We're talking about beauty, and this is something that is such a big thing in our culture, and it's something very personal for you. So maybe for our listeners who haven't met you before, whatever you want to share about your story, how this became such a personal issue for you.
Yeah, definitely. So just to kind of give a broad overview of who I am and what I'm doing in the world. So I'm a marriage and family therapist up here in Minnesota. And I also am a spiritual director. And given those two titles, it's interesting because I'm not currently practicing. Instead, I actually am teaching at Bethel University. I teach a course called Introduction to Wellbeing, which is a holistic approach to the soul, our soul's well-being. So that has been a huge gift. And then there's this whole beauty piece that has kind of swooped in unexpectedly over the past, it's been about the last 8 years or so that never did I think would I be spending hours and hours writing a book about beauty or having discussions like I had the opportunity to with you. This has been a huge turn in my life that has actually turned into a huge gift. But yeah, how I got to be so passionate about it is, I think it's about 8 years now ago that I was invited by my therapist, my personal therapist, to take a pause because she was noting that my relationship with food and exercise had gotten a little out of control. But you have to understand, in my life at that time, I was, I don't know if it was, you could call it denial. And at the same time, though, I shouldn't say all of my friends, a good amount of my peers and the people that I would see often, they believed a lot of the same messages about food and exercise. Yeah. So in a lot of those narratives being, the more exercise, the better, the less food, the better. And the more perfect, in quotes, your food is, the better. And so I thought I was just, doing it right and trying to be a good steward of my body. And lo and behold, my therapist, let me know that, actually this has become such an issue that I would recommend that you go into intensive treatment.
Wow.
So, yeah, that ended up being, I thought it was going to, that's a whole story there in and of itself. And I will probably mention this a little bit later, but I do have a book coming out next. So June 2023, that really dives into this and the layers of this. But I did end up pausing my practice and actually ended up having to leave that job to do a long stint in intensive eating disorder treatment. And simultaneously, because I don't actually think this was a good idea, but I was simultaneously getting another master's degree in spiritual formation. And so,
yeah. What a load, what all at once. Yeah.
Crazy pairing. I actually did debate for a while. I was like, should I really be doing these at the same time? And it ended up being this like really interesting pairing, because during the day I would be having these kind of cultural ideas about beauty and body image being shed and torn away. Whereas then in the evenings I would go home and read about like grace and shame and, these mystics, these Christian mystics who were like so deeply in love with God. And so it like, toward the end of my treatment stint, this idea of this all kind of came under the idea of beauty. And there's kind of a long story there, but just to kind of try to make this short, which it isn't, I ended up kind of finding the umbrella of beauty, being able to articulate this concept that I really believe I see so deeply. And I hear in the voices of the women in my intensive treatment rooms, and also in women that I have, been in therapeutic relationship with, like I've been their therapist, the pain of these cultural beauty narratives, and the shame that they have caused in the lives of so many different women and girls, and men. I think this is an issue for men as well, though. This is such a big issue. I've chosen to focus on females. But I could see that by naming that we are being sold a broken brand of beauty, I really want to help us see that we are buying our own marginalization, our own shame. And I'm not saying that from a place of, this is so bad, from a shaming place. I'm saying this as in like, this is purposefully being done to us. Wow. And I want us to open our eyes, because this is like the billions and billions of dollars that people are making on us by teaching us that our bodies and, all forms of beauty, our faces, all of these things are imperfect, and we have to it's never going to be enough. And I found that I could juxtapose that with this idea of true beauty, and how I'm defining beauty as the life of God at work in us and among us. And like I said, that really interesting pairing that I had during my time in intensive treatment, I was just at times just so in awe of how expansive God is and how I cannot even begin to understand him. And just thinking of like how that dwarfs this cultural concept of beauty that isn't real beauty at all. It actually disintegrates us.
Yeah. That it does a number on our brains for so many of us in this culture. I'm thinking of a couple of young ladies who I have spoken with within the past week. One last Friday, one earlier today. One who from the age of around 12 was in the music industry. And it was all about, you got to look this way, and you're not pretty enough here, or you got to do this so you're going to look more beautiful. And so, this is the way you look on camera or on screen or whatever. And another young lady who is still a teenager, and she can't look at herself in the mirror. She hates the way she looks so bad that she doesn't want to even look at herself in the mirror. And this pain is big. And like you said, it affects men too, but especially for young women. You mentioned that this is being done to us. talk a little bit about some of what is being done to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but the numbers in terms of like the diet industry and weight loss industry is monumental. I don't want to venture a guess because I'm not, it's not coming to mind, but it is like in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And then on top of that, we have the beauty and anti-aging industry, which again is hundreds of billions of dollars. And there's this a professor of psychiatry, I believe, at Harvard. I think his name is Paul Hamburg, and he talks about how if we make beauty ideals so unrealistic, of course, we're going to be chasing, like it's an advertiser's dream. Basically, we're going to be chasing that ideal forever. The market's customers will never disappear. It's a rough paraphrase, but just to say, this is being done on purpose to us. Yeah, go ahead.
The plastic surgery industry is another one that comes to mind. I don't think any woman can spend any time on social media, in magazines, on TV, anywhere without getting bombarded with these messages.
No, and I think it's somewhere, there's a documentary called The Illusionist. And in that documentary, they talk about how 80% of our waking hours, we are exposed to some kind of media. That's like crazy. So I sometimes will say that we are being brainwashed with this broken brand of beauty. And, some people I think might think like, oh, wow, that's really strong language. However, if you think about that, 80% of the time we are being exposed to largely fake images. I mean, if we think about social media and the filters, and then we go look in the mirror and wonder what's wrong with me that my skin isn't flawless and my body hasn't been, parts haven't been chopped off from Photoshop. I mean, to put it bluntly, but it does a number on us.
Yeah. You obviously, perhaps unconsciously bought into a lot of that and had to do some hard work to come to a new understanding of beauty. I'd like to know what was going on in your soul during that time and what it took for you to make that switch. It hasn't been easy for you. I know it's not easy for anyone, but I'd just like to look at what that process was like a bit for you.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think it's such a multidimensional process. I know for me, a big piece was the nutrition piece and kind of getting more nutrients on board. And so with that, so there are certain, just issues in terms of brain chemistry that shift. And so that was that was a big piece of my story. Though with that, there are so many pieces. I think I will name that. I think at one point about 3/4 of my way, so it'd probably be about I don't know, like anywhere between 6 and 9 months. There was a pretty significant shift, and I of course there's nutrition and serotonin and all those pieces that are helping, and at the same time I also started. There was a very deep shift. Where I started to see that for me, it was, what I would call the eating disorder voice, but we could even say that, that of the voice of perfectionism or the self-critic, that this voice or this force, whatever you want to call it, this was actually out to destroy me.
Yes.
Because I started to see the trajectory of things. If I continued down that path, it would be likely that I would be chronically in some kind of treatment setting. And I started to see that actually the purposes of the eating disorder was for my demise. However, I started to see that in a really clear, very clear way that God wanted me to thrive.
Yes.
And wanted fullness of life for me. And I started to see that in a new, different way that I never had seen before, because I could see that multidimensional impact on my mental, emotional, relational, physical, spiritual well-being, that the voice of perfectionism and self-criticism and some of my habits with food and exercise, how that was really depleting every aspect of who I was. And then I started to see how actually God wanted the exact opposite. He wanted me to thrive in every dimension of who I was. And he had plans for me and what he wanted me to do in the world. And, Dr. Carol, when I think back to when I started to like have proper nutrients and was able to like start to shed some of those really heavy layers of self-criticism, I remember just feeling like so alive, like, oh my goodness, my brain is functioning like like not in I wasn't like I'm brilliant kind of a way, but like, wow, I have so much capacity cognitively. So for me, I think it was it took a while, but then once the lights kind of turned on, and I do think honestly for me, and I don't want to like over Christianize this, but like I really do think like I see God's grace in that to see this. Like there was such a stark contrast of the road to life and then the road to my gradual or who knows on undoing.
Yes. Yeah. And you've been talking about eating disorders, and that can be fatal. It is a fatal disease without turning the corner. And the physician part of me, I just want to mention that shame, Melissa, the shame aspect. How did you contend with that?
Yeah. So that's such a good question, because I really feel like that is like a linchpin to this whole issue of beauty. And so how did I contend with it? Truly, and this is where God's grace comes in. And again, I don't want to just like oversimplify this. For me, and this is something that I actually really get into in the book. You had Dr. Kurt Thompson on your show, and I've read The Soul of Shame, and I'm like, I feel like I'm his biggest fan. And my husband's like, I think you should get like a Dr. Kurt Thompson fan club shirt.
Yep.
So what we know about shame is that it's an embodied experience. This is not just a cognitive abstraction. And so part of my treatment experience was actually, we had to do yoga every day, which is something I had never done before. In that space, I actually was able to like experience had an embodied experience of God in terms of not in a very mystical way even, but just what would it be like to envision like God's grace as real in my body as I do the shame that I feel.
Yes.
And so when I was able to make that grace real in a way, there was something there that shifted shame for me. And so even now, when I start to notice certain signs of shame in my body, like that sinking pit in your stomach, or I think it shows up for all of us in different ways, but just to notice like, oh, wow, there is shame right there coming up. No need to panic. And then actually take a moment to allow God's grace to tend to those places in my body and my mind. And also remember that this is, again, Kurt Thompson talks about how shame is a minion of evil. And so for me, again, this kind of leads into that idea of like, well, shame's, its plans for me would be to lead to my destruction.
Yes.
So I don't want to follow down that path. So how can I actually, shift things and move back toward a space of truth and grace and God's love and embrace?
That's beautiful. You're referencing Dr. Kurt Thompson, and I love his work as well. In the Soul of Shame, he talks about the shame attendant, that it's always something that to contend with, and us getting self-contempt for our shame doesn't help. That's just more shame. So I love how you described just bringing this into the light, inviting God's grace to speak to those very places. I find that so beautiful, the way you've described that, because I think that is such a big part of all of our lives, whether food is an issue for us or not. The shame and contending with that and bringing God's grace to it, that applies to every one of us.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Dr. Carol, I know we've been talking about eating disorders, and there is one little piece that I probably should add, because we're talking about, beauty and eating disorders. And I think sometimes in these conversations, one of my, I don't want to say worries or concerns or wonderings is someone listening thinking like, oh, well, I don't have an eating disorder, so this conversation doesn't apply to
Sure.
me.
Yes.
And uh, with that, I think one of the things that I've learned a lot about is the impact of, like we've been talking about, like diet culture and advertising, that marketing and advertising impact of the thin ideal. And also, like I came across one survey recently where it was like 75% of women reported habits of disordered eating. And so just to say that these impacts of beauty and body image that I'm trying to speak to, yes, of course, I want this message is for anyone struggling with diagnosable eating disorder. And my message is actually for I think sometimes it's the kind of the estimates, it's anywhere from 85 to 95% of women who struggle with body image to the point of hating their bodies. And so this conversation is, for eating disorders and far beyond that as well.
Absolutely. And thank you, Melissa, for pointing that out. Absolutely true. That makes me think of the selfie culture part of who we are, plays into the messaging. I'm thinking of a trip I took to Miami a few months ago when it was still a little cooler than it is right now when we're recording this. It's blistering summer, but when it's cooler, I was with some friends there, and we were on a tour boat in the harbor there briefly, and there was a woman there who obviously had spent a great deal of time and money on her appearance, and she spent the whole boat trip taking selfies of herself. She didn't have an eating disorder, at least it didn't look that way. She wasn't unhealthfully underweight or overweight, but the obvious focus on her appearance, it was like there was nothing else that mattered to her. It makes me think of the people who are so that is such a huge part of their brain that they aren't thriving as God intended us to.
Yes. Yeah. And so the whole topic of social media blows this conversations like this conversation is, I think a lot, I mean, an even bigger deal now than it was when I was growing up. And I don't even know that we even know the ramifications of it quite yet, but exactly what you're speaking to, what we're seeing a lot of is, so instead of knowing what it's like to live in our bodies, like to feel the excitement of our heart beating when we see the Grand Canyon, or our breath be taken away when we are riding fast on our bike or whatever it is. Instead of knowing how to live in our bodies, we oftentimes will view ourselves as a third party observer, because we're so used to thinking, well, how am I going to look in this picture? How will so-and-so see me? And so this idea of self-objectification is becoming a much bigger deal than it did, pre social media. And so exactly what you're saying, the energy of mind and heart to, I'm wondering if that woman you were seeing then will go through, this is what I've seen, figure out, well, which angle is best of me. And yeah. And that's what we see. And so body image struggles, the more, again, I think, I don't have body image definition in front of me, but the image that we, basically it's pretty straightforward in one of the definitions I use, the image that we see our bodies, the way we see our bodies. And if we're literally spending hours, minutes scrolling through our images of ourselves, of our bodies, we're going to be focusing on our body image. Yeah. And I'm truly not saying this from a place of, shaming anyone or condemnation or judgment. It's just, I think it's very helpful and good for us to notice the society we live in and the trends, and then noticing, is this bringing life or is it not? And if not, what kinds of things can we put in our lives, boundaries, so that that negative effect is diminished.
Yeah. I can imagine that there might be some of our listeners, Melissa, who understand that eating disorders and this focus on food and beauty, but there's another side The physician part of me understands this too, and that is the obesity epidemic. And I want to address this carefully, but I want your perspective. We've got this over Instagram culture, social media culture with beauty and the multiple billions of dollars. On the other hand, we have significant percentages of the people who are unhealthfully overweight to the place where it is impacting their well-being. How do you think about that and sort that out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't know if you're familiar with Christy Harrison. She's a dietitian and author, and she hosts a podcast called Food Psych. Is that name ring a bell to you?
I'll have to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So she wrote a book called Anti-Diet. And in that book, she kind of details some of the pieces of the obesity epidemic that I previously was unaware of. And one of the things that she notes is that I can't remember exactly which year. And again, I don't have the number in front of me, so I'm not going to like do a shot in the dark, but and maybe it was in the 90s. I cannot remember, but they actually changed the number overnight, the threshold for what was considered to be obese. And when you look at who made that decision, I guess there was a committee that was put together, and the committee, a lot of the committee behind it was actually had like basically pharmaceutical companies that produced weight loss drugs. And so, even when we think about some of, our medical research and our medical guidelines that were given, like even the BMI, it is a bit, I know it's contested these days, as it was given to us by an astrologer back in the 18 something. So, I think it's, I know that I've heard things along those lines. And then also I know that I interviewed a woman named Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani in episode 70 something on my podcast. And, she talks about, she will treat, so she goes under the health at every size, but she would say that that's a certain framework, health at every size. And so she actually treats a lot of clients with things like diabetes and maybe who have higher weights. And she talks about how oftentimes her focus is actually not on the number, but on the values of the client. So say, for instance, I want to, I don't know, be able to walk my niece or nephew to the bus stop or go for walks with them. And so she talks about how, when we actually look at these issues through more of a values-based versus weight or number-based treatments or guidelines, it actually becomes a lot more helpful. And I guess you could say then if you look at the metrics of it, it actually is successful in quotes in terms of health measures. Yeah. However, there was never a specific focus on weight. And good. So, yeah. And so I'm just seeing, I think oftentimes what I've seen is, there's this idea of fat phobia and marginalization of people in larger bodies. And what my eyes have really been open to is just the beauty and diversity of our bodies. And I think oftentimes in our culture, we are we've so like almost worshiped thinness. It's hard. I think I've been able to see like, oh, wow, a healthy body or health can look so many different sizes and shapes. It doesn't need to look like that Fitspo person on Instagram or something. So I have more to say on that, but that's just kind of, those are a couple like pieces that might speak to that question.
That's good, Melissa. And that could be a whole episode or two in itself. Yes. Absolutely. You've referenced a couple times the spiritual dimension, receiving God's grace and his view of you as a person, such an important part of your journey. As we move toward the end here, talk a bit about how you see God sees beauty and how our coming to understand more of that can change our self-concept and how helpful that can be.
Yeah. Sometimes language is hard because it can find some of these things. And I would say, to me, God is beauty. Like the glory of God is like I think is the true definition of beauty. And I don't know how you put that into words. And so for me, how we change our self-concept, and this is where that spiritual director, spiritual formation piece of me, this feels like such a gift, is to see ways that we can start having our eyes open to the vastness of God, the mystery of God, the love of God. And somehow, I think when we kind of start to inch toward the glory, like the true glory and love of God, it really, like I said, I think a while ago, it really dwarfs these definitions of beauty. With that, though, I guess I do also want to say, I think that upfront work is really helpful to kind of do some of that media literacy and things along those lines, to notice, like, to do the undoing of the cultural ideas of beauty, to see like, wow, this is actually really messed up. And this road is not, it's actually not going to help me to thrive and become an integrative whole person. And so when you kind of see that, at least that's kind of how my own journey worked, is to kind of see how horrible actually that is, to put it bluntly. Then on the like opposite side of that, or like then I was I was able to see like, okay, well then what is real? And so with that, I think then that expansive beauty of God and being invited into that, how that actually then changes us and our perspectives.
That's great. That's great. We can see how God relishes beauty. Everything he made is beautiful. And stepping into that, the spiritual director part of you, I think that's a beautiful part of this whole conversation and what you bring. For people who may want to find out more about you, we'll make sure links are available in the notes and under this video, but just invite people to connect with what you have to say. I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yes, I would absolutely love for anyone listening to join me. I think that this is a communal endeavor. I think redefining beauty and walking away from cultural beauty and into this larger definition of beauty, I see it as like an ongoing journey of discovering just how big God's beauty is. And so I need other people to do that. And so I invite anyone listening who has any inclination to please follow along. There are several places. My website is impossible-beauty.com. And there you can go ahead and subscribe, and which means I'll just be sending out weekly emails, letting you know about the new podcasts or blogs that are posted. And that book release date is coming up June 2023. So I'm hoping to like have some special things coming up, again, to like invite the community. Like I'm just really into connecting with other women, and let's rebuild something better than what we've been handed. On Instagram, I'm at melissa.louise, LOUISE.Johnson. And then I'm also at impossible.beauty on Instagram as well. And then on Facebook, I think it's Impossible Beauty blog and podcast. I had to do something really long. So anyway, those are the places. And yes, this is all about inviting others in. So please, I would love for you to join me.
And we'll get those links and include them in the show notes and under this video. Melissa, this has been a delight. Many blessings to you and your journey in helping all of us redefine beauty. And this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carol.
Impossible Beauty. You are beautiful, and the impossible brand that we are sold doesn't cut it. I love how Melissa points us to the grace of God and to living in our bodies the way they are. Just so much, and we could have talked for a long time about a number of these concepts. Do check the links under this video. We'll have them there to Melissa Johnson's website, Impossible Beauty, her podcast, and the social and all the things. I would also love to hear from you. You can use the contact page on our website, drcarolministries.com. You'll also find the link to the contact page underneath here if you want to leave a confidential message. I would love it if you left a comment under this video as well. Do subscribe to this channel so that you can get our material each time we upload it about once a week. and I know that will be meaningful for you. And now, until next time, may you live fully alive.